Welcome back, viewers, to the latest researches and news. Today we have three major updates from the front line in Amhara region, and one of them is the most disturbing story we have ever covered on this channel. Firstly, we'll update you about the FANO claim that FANO's Bizamo command captures 3 urban areas in Wuliga in coordinated operations. Rifles seized. 4 Oromia Special Forces detained, including a spy in civilian clothes. Secondly, about Wuldia City IDP crisis. Thousands of displaced families abandoned by the government. Local businesses step in where the state has completely failed. And in last, about a war crime that cannot go unspoken. Ethiopian regime soldiers have raped an 8-year-old girl and a 9-year-old girl in North Wulo. Both children are in hospital. The regime tried to hide it. The community refused to let it stay hidden. Let us start with the battlefield and with a development that tells you a great deal about where FANO's Bizamo command stands in this war. To understand what happened in Wulega, you need to understand what FANO's Bizamo command represents. This is not a loosely organized militia operating reactively. The Bizamo Command is a structured military formation operating across the Wulega front, where heavy artillery exchanges have been ongoing for several consecutive days. It operates under the Amhara FANO national movement and has been conducting sustained operations in East Wulega and Horo Guduru Wulega zones deep inside territory that the federal government considers its own. Why is FANO operating in Wulega? Because this conflict has never been contained to Amhara alone. The resistance has consistently expanded its operational reach, not to conquer territory for its own sake, but to stretch the federal military thin, to cut supply lines, and to demonstrate that no front is truly secure for Abiy Ahmed's forces. In recent fighting with heavy artillery bombardments continuing on the Wulega front lines, FANO forces of the Bizamo Command launched coordinated operations and established control over 3 separate urban positions. First, Menda Fogida Ayana district, East Wulega zone, the Abeje Tibebu unit, entered Menda 4 in a coordinated morning assault. Regime forces were engaged, neutralized, and cleared from the area. Menda 4 came under FANO control. Second, Menda 3 Kebeli Sim district, simultaneous at the exact same time. The Angagutin unit entered Menda 3. A regime patrol unit was directly engaged. The patrol was neutralized, their vehicle destroyed. 2 operations, 2 locations launched simultaneously. This is deliberate tactical coordination, designed so that regime forces in one area cannot reinforce the other. Following both engagements, retreating regime forces pulled back and are now reported to be sheltering inside the Angagutin town municipality building, a civic building that is now functioning as a military last resort. This is what desperation looks like on the ground. Third, Tulugana Town Ebe Dongoro District, Horo Guduru Wulega zoning in a separate simultaneous operation. The Tafere Alemu Satenau unit seized full control of Tulugana Town. What was captured? 31 rifles confiscated across these operations. 4 members of the Oromia Special Forces detained, including 1 intelligence and security officer who had been operating in civilian clothing. A spy embedded among civilians, caught by FANO fighters. This is how FANO operates, not just with firepower, but with coordination, intelligence, and the ability to execute multiple simultaneous operations across different districts. 3 towns, 1 unified command, 1 morning. The regime's response to days of artillery bombardment was supposed to suppress FANO. What it produced instead was a FANO counter-advance into 3 urban areas before those artillery barrels had cooled. Now to a humanitarian situation in North Wulo zone that exposes the complete moral failure of this government toward the people it has displaced. Woldia City. Thousands of internally displaced persons, families who fled active fighting, who lost their homes, their livestock, their livelihoods, who arrived in Woldia seeking basic safety and some form of state support. In recent weeks, IDPs who had been sheltered at the College Village IB camp in Woldia City were forced to relocate, not to better facilities, not to proper housing, to temporary sites with conditions described as wholly inadequate, insufficient shelter, limited access to food, no meaningful health services, no protection for children, women, or elderly residents. These are the conditions in which displaced Ethiopians, displaced by an Ethiopian National Defense Force military campaign, are being forced to live. And the city administration of Woldia, representing the government responsible for their situation, has provided no meaningful assistance. From the FANO and resistance perspective, this is not a surprise. This is the consistent pattern of Abiy Ahmed's government when it comes to the Amhara civilian population. Bomb their towns, displace their families, then abandon the displaced. The federal government has resources. It has the budget to fly Ethiopian National Defense Force troops across the country on unscheduled Ethiopian Airlines flights. It has the funds to purchase drones and artillery. It has money for political events and national dialogue ceremonies in Addis Ababa. But for the families sleeping in temporary sites in Woldia, nothing. Who filled the gap? The local business community of Woldia City. Private traders, shop owners, and entrepreneurs who looked at the suffering on their doorstep and chose not to walk past it. They donated more than 200,000 Ethiopian bail to provide essential food supplies for the displaced families. 200,000 bail, raised by ordinary people, not by the state, not by the ruling party, by the community itself, the same community that has been watching its neighbors arrive in displacement for years. This is what FANO and the resistance have always said. The people of Amhara do not need a government that claims to represent them while abandoning them. They need each other. And in Woldia, that is exactly what is sustaining thousands of displaced lives right now. We must now report something that is deeply painful to speak about. We have hesitated over how to say it, but we will not be silent because silence protects those who commit crimes, not those who survive them. In Filike town, Meket Woreda, North Wollo Zone soldiers of the Ethiopian National Defense Force have committed acts of sexual violence against children. In recent fighting in the Shogwe Mesk area of Filike town, an 8-year-old girl was raped by an Ethiopian National Defense Force soldier. She was found unconscious. She was rushed to Shedeo Meket Primary Hospital in critical condition. Days later, in the Yedro Hamusit area of the same town, a 9-year-old girl was raped by another member of the Ethiopian military. She was also taken to hospital for urgent medical treatment. 2 children, 2 soldiers, the same town, the same military. Both girls are now receiving medical care. The trauma they carry, physical and psychological, cannot be measured. The Ethiopian regime initially attempted to conceal what happened, to prevent it from becoming known beyond the immediate area. This is also part of the pattern: commit the act, then suppress the knowledge of it. It was the local community of Filake that refused to allow that suppression. Residents came forward. They spoke about what they had witnessed. Their resistance against silence is the reason this story is being reported at all. From the perspective of the resistance from FANO to Tigray People Liberation Front, this is exactly what they have been saying for years. This is not a disciplined national army conducting a legitimate counterinsurgency. This is a military force operating without accountability, without consequence, and without moral restraint against the very civilian population it claims to protect. The Tigray People Liberation Front has documented similar patterns from the 2020-2022 war. FANO has reported similar conduct in Amhara throughout this conflict. Sexual violence as a weapon. Children as targets. Communities forced into silence by fear until the silence breaks. Under international humanitarian law, under the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, sexual violence committed by military personnel against civilians, most especially against children, constitutes a war crime. When it forms part of a wider pattern of attacks against a civilian population, it constitutes a crime against humanity. The perpetrators of what happened in Filakit must be identified, prosecuted, and held accountable. So must the commanders whose failures of discipline and oversight created the conditions for these crimes to occur, and the international community which attends the opening ceremonies of Ethiopia's national dialogue and calls its processes historic, must reckon with what its continued silence and engagement enables on the ground. An 8-year-old girl was left unconscious in a hospital in North Wollo. That is what is happening in Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia right now. 3 stories tonight. 3 dimensions of one reality. On the Battlefield FANO's Bizamo Command captured 3 towns in coordinated operations across Wulega. 31 weapons taken. A spy detained. Regime forces cornered in a municipality building. The resistance is advancing methodically, intelligently, and on multiple fronts simultaneously. In Waldia, thousands of displaced families have been abandoned by the government that caused their displacement. Kept alive by the generosity of their own community, 200,000 bear raised by ordinary people, because the state failed to act. And in Filakit, 2 little girls are in hospital tonight, victims of crimes committed by Ethiopian National Defense Force soldiers. Crimes the regime tried to bury, crimes that the people of that community refused to let be forgotten. The resistance FANO, Tigray People Liberation Front, and their allies has always said that this is not simply a military conflict. It is a fight for the survival and dignity of peoples who are being bombed, displaced, starved, and violated by a government that calls itself democratic. Tonight's 3 stories are proof of exactly that. We will keep reporting on every battle, every displaced family, every atrocity for as long as this war continues and as long as the truth needs to be told. Like, share, and subscribe, ring the bell, and share this video because the world needs to know what is happening in Ethiopia.